One of the things that I get to do is I get to talk to my social media heroes, and this guy is one of them. In all these years that we have seen this attack on law enforcement, police officers being demonized and vilified. Um, this guy has been a voice, not just for law enforcement here in Arizona, where we both live, but really around the country. And so I thought you needed to meet this guy, Dave, and I'm going to butcher your last name because I know he has Davy G on X.
Right.
Davy Goitia. How did I
Yeah,
do there?
that's great. That's really good. Yeah.
Fellow Arizonan. So you're a police officer, but you're also an advocate, and you're second vice president of your FOP Lodge. We're going to talk about that. But I got to ask you the question I ask every cop I talk to, Dave. Why'd you become a cop?
Well, actually, it's like my third career. I started late. All my family were school teachers, believe it or not, all of them. And I started off as a sixth grade public school teacher. But I've always just had a lot of respect for law enforcement. And I just teaching didn't work out. And in my heart, I feel like I was called to be a police officer. So I started a little bit late in life, but I've been the victim of an armed robbery. I've been held up at gunpoint when I was in college. I worked all summer in high school to buy a truck, and some jerk stole it. And so I've been impacted by crime, and so I'm very passionate. I know what it's like to be a victim, and so ultimately it was my calling, and it just worked out for me, and I've never looked back.
So I got to take a side trip for a minute. What do you think about the current trend of recruiting school teachers who want to change careers into being cops?
I'm not even, I'm not aware of that. I haven't heard that. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, we need all the help we can get.
Well, absolutely. And that's one of the things that we're having to do in law enforcement is do rather unusual recruiting because of this demonization of the American law enforcement officer. And that's one of the things that you do is you really advocate for cops. How did that start for you, and what does that look like?
When I took over our Glendale FOP Lodge 12, we had identified as a deficiency social media or lack thereof. We had no social media footprint. I was never a social media person. I just was not into it at all. But we were told that really we had to start, to get involved. So I jumped in on Twitter X. Twitter X is, I tell people, if you're in a law enforcement organization and you're not on X, you are missing out right now because there is a lot of support for law enforcement. So I jumped in, and the more that I learned about it, I realized it's really become a powerful tool for us to, to use to push back. When people unjustly go after cops, we're able to use that tool to push back. A lot of these, activist groups, journalists who tend to be anti-police, they're terrible at social media. They are terrible at Twitter. If you watch, they have zero engagement. And there's a local reporter, in Arizona that tends to go after us pretty good. And every time he does it, we slap him around on X because we have followers that are very passionate about supporting law enforcement. So when he's not treating us fairly, we'll draw attention to it. And then our followers kind of hold him accountable. So it's been about a 3-year process, lots of learning, but we've been able to use Twitter X in so many powerful ways to advocate for cops. And I just tell people, if you're not on it, you should get on it. Right now is a really good time to be on it.
Well, and you're right, because, not only from a personal standpoint, but from an agency standpoint, we saw Twitter was really used back in 2014
Right.
in the death of Michael Brown. Twitter was really used back then to whoop people up. and get them to really hate on the cops and this and that. And we weren't very good at it
Right.
back then. And police leaders tend to be very behind in things
That's
like
right.
social media, and they tend to be afraid of it. And but now, just from even an agency, not even an advocacy role, but in an agency role, if your agency is not on X and you're not posting things like traffic report and what's going on a crime scene, and if you have an officer involved shooting and things like that, you're missing out, aren't you?
Yeah. Oh, there's no doubt about it. And in all, in addition to the, the information component to it, if you're a law enforcement labor organization, you can use it to advance your organization politically. We've met so many important people on X that see our content and they love it and they're drawn to it. That's opened up opportunities to form very good community partnerships. Um, like I said, they're powerful people that have influence over our careers, journalists, people like that, and they're not very good at X, really. If you really look at them, they really are not very good. So if you are, you can almost use it to advance the truth, because we know how some of these cases go, right? The legacy media, they're looking for controversial stuff. Sometimes they're not always fair. And you can really use X to counter some of those false narratives and hold them accountable, for their content. And so, no, it's been a game changer for us.
Now, what's your thoughts on using TikTok in a similar manner?
No, we don't. I don't like the China connection to TikTok. I've heard, just to speak frankly, I've heard some things that concern me about data gathering, and we're trying to get into our model is, we'd like to use Instagram to kind of reach out to some of our younger officers, our younger members, but more for just like internal information sharing. I would recommend, just me personally, Instagram, and then Facebook, and for maybe some of the older officers, but Twitter X for the political stuff, and in kind of standing up for yourselves. It really is a gold standard for politicians and journalists. They value Twitter X. They know how important it is, and if you can really master that realm, you can really use it as a powerful way to, again, push back on false narratives and advocate for law enforcement. So, but no, we're not. I'm not a big fan of TikTok, and again, it's not that I would necessarily endorse one over the other, but I just personally have some concerns about some of the research I've seen about it.
And yeah, we agree with you on that. So when you look at Twitter X, and you said something there that's very important, where it's not just to push back, but it's to stand up for ourselves. And after the summer of 2020, where again, the American law enforcement officer just got kicked in the teeth day after day after day on social media, and we and our jobs became so politicized. That's about when you jumped into this, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's about 3 years ago. And what's great too is, I mentioned it, people are coming off of the sidelines. People who before, the silent majority, they're not going to go out and riot and loot when the police are treated poorly, right? There's a very, I think it's a dangerous vocal minority who will do that. They'll take advantage of those opportunities to sow chaos. But the silent majority, we're just trying to get from point A to point B, raise families, work. We come home, we're tired, we don't have a lot of time, but they're on X, and I think that they're starting to come off of the sidelines to really show support for law enforcement. It gives them, a mechanism to really, back us up. And I mean, the support that we get, I mean, I would tell you, I'm by no means am I a tough guy, but it really, some days it almost brings a tear to my eye, because the thoughtful comments and support, people will say things like, hey, we've got your six, we've got your back. And, I don't know. It just seems like we didn't used to hear that so much, but I do think people are coming off of the sidelines and they're using X to go out of their way to say, hey, we're going to back the blue. And it just melts my heart, when it happens. It really is amazing.
And I think that is so important. And I get the same thing. I'm on X as SGT Betsy Smith, Sergeant Betsy Smith, and I get, of course I get some idiots, but I get so many kindnesses
Right.
um
Right.
from people on Twitter X and from politicians and from people in the media. And I think that the more we stand up for ourselves with facts,
Right.
the more that people are brought to the side of Blue Lives Matter, back the blue, and especially, from a union standpoint, the FOP, your your national vice president, Joe Gamaldi,
Yeah.
um,
Oh,
I'm on TV with him all the time, and he is just such a great advocate, and he is allowed to be very fearless, as are you. What does that look like from a leadership standpoint? You're really allowed to speak truth to power, if you will. How does that look from your leadership standpoint?
yeah. Well, I'm really lucky because, the agency that I work for is very supportive of what they do, and they do understand I'm bound to a social media policy, right? So there's boundaries which I would never cross anyway. It's common sense stuff, but aside from that, they do appreciate that, we have First Amendment, rights, and they know that I take advantage of those. And the thing is too, we're edgy. I think that's something that a lot of we're kind of fearless, and we're always kind of pushing the envelope in terms of edginess, because when you're not using Twitter X, for example, to advance or for a political purpose or to push back, the mission should be to grow it. It should be to grow your followers. That's your megaphone. You want as many followers as you can because it gives you a louder voice. And so there's got to be an entertainment factor, and people like controversy and they like edginess. So I feel like sometimes we say things that maybe others are afraid to say.
Now, there are politicians and activists who say that police unions and police associations exist solely to keep bad cops on the job. What's your response to that?
It's total BS. Just as an example, I mean, for Arizona, we have Officer Bill of Rights. Those are really the key protections that law enforcement have. That's not the FOP or the labor unions. That's state lawmakers that said, hey, we don't want officers being thrown under the bus for political purposes. All we do is guide officers through those protections. And, anybody who really takes seriously the role of peer representing officers, when there's an allegation, and something that we train on at the FOP, the standard that we hold is you're telling these officers you have to tell the truth. That's number one. You tell the complete truth. And as long as you're doing that, but at the same time advocating them in terms of their rights and helping them with the process, you're doing it correctly. So that whole narrative, if it comes from a place of ignorance. And the rules, the protections, at least in Arizona, that are built in for law enforcement, that comes from state lawmakers. I mean, it doesn't come from the local union. So it's just not true.
What is your response to someone who says cops don't deserve qualified immunity? We need to get rid of qualified immunity. In fact, talk about what that is and why
Yeah.
we need it.
Yeah, it's such a great topic, and I've got a story, and I'll try not to be too long, but essentially the way that I describe qualified immunity is that normal people in our society are not obligated to use force to protect the public. We have a duty to do that. We don't have a choice in certain circumstances. We have to use force to protect the public and to uphold law and order. So qualified immunity essentially says, because we're obligated to do that, because we're charged with that responsibility, and because we're making split-second decisions, if we don't use enough force, we're dead. If we use too much force, right, they want to fire us, send us to prison, take away everything that we have. We get some grace. We don't necessarily have to be perfect. And so to sue us, to hold us civilly responsible, there's a little bit of a buffer built in that basically says, hey, listen, we're demanding that these people protect us. And it's not always going to be pretty. It's not going to look good on video. But at the end of the day, they're doing it for us. So tie goes to the runner. We get the benefit of the doubt on this. I will tell you, I was speaking at the West Valley NAACP out in Avondale. I was invited to speak, and there was a civil rights attorney, very nice gentleman. They were actually very welcoming to me, and he was very nice. And he talked about, hey, listen, just so you know, I sue cops. That's what I do. That's my job. He says, but I do. He goes, but believe it or not, he goes, I do support law enforcement. He goes, I just, there's some things that are bad, and it's my job to, to basically, hold police accountable. And he said, but he says, but the whole theme of this meeting was we need to get more people of color involved in the profession. We need to do a better job. But we were talking, going back and forth, and he just said, but I just don't believe in qualified immunity. We need to get rid of that. And I said, well, I said, that's interesting because we've had this really good conversation about getting, for example, young Black men, young Black women involved in this profession. And I said, and I agree with that. I said, but I would submit to you that the way not to do that is to tell these young Black men and women that every single time you use force, you could potentially be dragged into court, into civil court, and have to defend your bank account, your home, your cars, everything that you have. I said, because these young kids are not dumb. And who would sign up for a career like that? Think about that. And I got to tell you, the light bulb kind of went off. And he kind of looked up and he kind of had a pause and he was kind of nodding his head.
That's absolutely. I believe we wouldn't have cops anymore if
Oh,
you got rid of
yeah,
qualified immunity.
that's right.
And cops wouldn't be able to have property or families or
Right.
any of that.
That's right.
Um, where do you see, 4 years now post George Floyd,
Yeah.
where do you see the state of law enforcement moving forward?
Yeah.
And where do what do you see as the support for our profession? Are you seeing changes?
Yeah, I think we're seeing more people come off of the sidelines. What concerns me though is I think some of our inner cities, I think the trajectory that they're on and the damage that has been done, and you still have some of these local leaders talking about defunding the police and all these, reimagining police and sending social workers. And the problem is think about the thing about cops, Sarge, and you know this, right? You know, we tend not to be the social elite, right? Maybe we're not like the most educated, right? Uh, we're not always super polished, but we run toward gunshots, right? And we have common sense, and these officers are not dumb. And so they're just not going to stick around if they work for some of these agencies where they're not getting the support. And they're looking at, I think now they're starting to look at other states and other jurisdictions where they get the political support, and they're leaving. And then on top of that, nobody wants to work for some of these cities. So I'm very fearful about some of these inner cities. And I think jurisdictions that actually really do support the police are going to start to attract a lot of laterals, out of state laterals. And I think that they're going to be able to, provide a very good level of service in the law enforcement realm. But I do worry about some of the inner cities. In those jurisdictions where there is support, there is community support, you do see people coming off of the sidelines. And even in the inner cities now, you see people. I mean, I think it was Sarge, wasn't it? I think it was wasn't it the Oakland NAACP, I think, that showed that showed up to the meeting and started yelling at the leaders, and they're saying, what are you guys doing? You need to start arresting these people who are
Right.
terrorizing the elderly in our community. So I think, I think the support, I think it's starting to turn around. I think we've realized how bad defund was. I just don't know the damage that has been done and how some of these cities recover. It really concerns me.
It is very concerning because you don't want safety in the United States to become regional. That is
Right,
not
that's
the
right.
American way of justice. That is not the American way of the law enforcement system.
Right.
Everyone, regardless of your income, where you live, all of that, should get the best police response ever. And that's what the American law enforcement officer is trying to provide. But unfortunately, you're right, it is becoming regional. So
Right.
talk about where people can find you personally, where they can
Yeah.
find your big account, and so that they can follow you
Yeah.
and frankly be entertained and informed every single day.
Yeah, no, we'd love it. Help us become an even louder voice. So I run our Lodge Twitter account. It's at Glendale FOP 12. That one is becoming a very loud voice for law enforcement at Glendale FOP 12 on Twitter. And you're gonna have to bear with me because I'm not on my personal one a whole lot. I'm normally banging away on our Lodge 12 account. So I'm kind of embarrassed to say I don't even know my
I
personal.
think your personal one is at Davy G.
Yeah, it's at Davy G with 3 E's underscore. So
There
at
you go.
Davy G triple E underscore. And I'm not gonna stop. I'm gonna keep calling people out, using it. Everyone on law enforcement needs to get on Twitter X, and let's start to hold these people who are anti-police accountable. And thank you. And
Absolutely.
by the way, thank you for what you do. You're a powerhouse. We talk about, so just you. I see Joe Gamaldi, and I see you. I see you also banging away for cops. You're legendary status also, Sarge. So really, thank you for your advocacy. Uh, and you sent us the NPA that nice box of thank you cards. So let's make sure everybody understands too, in terms of advocacy for law enforcement, your legendary status, and we love and respect you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll tell you, the National Police Association is such an amazing organization, and their advocacy, not just for law enforcement officers, but for those people who really do back the blue, is extraordinary. Dave, thank you so much for taking time today to spend time with us, talk about what you're doing. And if you would like more information about the National Police Association, visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Every day, the brave men and women of law enforcement put their lives on the line to keep us safe. But they need our help to continue their mission. Activist politicians, progressive prosecutors, the ACLU, and the rest of the anti-police forces receive millions in donations from extremist pro-criminal elements like George Soros and woke corporations. The National Police Association is fighting them in courts around the country, including the United States Supreme Court, defending officers who are being attacked for doing their jobs. Additionally, the National Police Association works year-round to pass tough-on-crime legislation to put and keep criminals behind bars. Consider going to nationalpolice.org and donating to keep us in the fight. Together we can win. That is nationalpolice.org.